What is up, guys? It's your girl T. If you've watched my last couple of videos, you know that I've been very fond of just jumping right into it lately. So today I'm going to be trying the new Juvia's Place foundation. It's not even that new anymore, but I polled y'all on IG to see if you wanted me to try it out on camera. And the only people who said no were straight cis males who almost definitely don't even watch my videos. Like, nobody asked you, Frank. Anyway, trying out this particular foundation today seems kind of appropriate for this topic. Let's talk about colorism, shall we? A hot button issue which seems to be getting a lot of attention in recent months and years, even though it's a tale as old as time, or as old as white supremacism anyway. I've got my little mirror down here, so I'm going to be looking into it. So I've been trying not to look like this as best I can, but I hope I have it at a good angle for this video. I think we're all probably aware what colorism is at this point. I don't imagine you would have clicked on this video if you didn't. And colorism is an obvious outgrowth of white supremacism. White supremacy isn't only about dipshits putting on hoods and dressing up like ghosts. White supremacy takes many forms, one of which is praising and favoring proximity to whiteness in non-white people. Brown paper bag test type of shit. And this isn't something that only white people do to us. We've been brainwashed to the point that we do it to ourselves. By the way, you may notice me keeping my pinky up a whole lot during this makeup application because I'm classy, but also because I sliced my finger open when I was chopping some Brussels sprouts last night. So sorry for this weird, somewhat questionable looking bandage I have on here, but I cut myself pretty deep. Anyway, when I was a kid, I don't really remember colorist or colorism being terms. I do remember hearing about being color struck. In particular, I remember that word being used to describe members of my family or people my parents knew or whatever. Without getting too personal, because you guys know that I do like to maintain my privacy the best I can while making public videos on a platform like such as YouTube. There are people who are color struck, or I guess the updated term colorist, in my family, and it affected relationships with my immediate family and our extended family in a lot of pretty significant ways. In any event, my mother and my brother have dark skin, and my dad and I are this complexion. Medium brown, I guess, but definitely unambiguously black. Which is another thing I've always found a bit strange about this entire divide. Like, you're either light-skinned or dark-skinned. Black people, which were brown, incidentally, but I think the use of the term black over the past several centuries was just another way to vilify and subjugate us. As evidenced by that story that was going around, I want to say just last week, about dictionary.com being asked to redefine black to remove the negative language and connotations that they had in their definition. Like, people were saying that it sends a bad message and so forth, depending on whatever it said that they had on there. I'm of two minds about that. On the one hand, great. That's something that shouldn't have been an issue in the first place, so yeah, change that shit. On the other hand, if you're actually looking up the word black in a dictionary, I think you have bigger problems. Or you just have entirely too much free time. Like, who's actually looking in a dictionary for that? Anyway, I digress. Black people come in many, many shades of brown, and a lot of us are just somewhere in between on that spectrum of light skin and dark skin. This obsession with classifying each other into one group or the other, into one of these two things, is bizarre and unnecessary, frankly, but it's also reality. Slavery with a white supremacy chaser, as well as my favorite thing, the binary opposition ways of thinking where I am this and you are that and never the twain shall meet, have led us to yet another unnecessary divide that we continue to perpetuate and enforce within our own community. Centuries have passed, actual centuries, and we are still on this house nigga, field nigga shit. It's Stockholm Syndrome on a million. They've got us policing our own skin, our own hair textures, features, policing, overseeing, and hating ourselves to adhere to and favor a standard that isn't even our own. Overseer, 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 officer, 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 officer. I mean, do you see how deep this brainwashing goes? Do you see how much damage and healing we still have to do to have any hope of affecting change, not only on an institutional level, but in our own homes? I mentioned earlier that there's issues of colorism or being color struck within my own family, which is interesting because on my dad's side, we're from Trinidad. On my mom's side, we're American. So I've known firsthand that colorism is not a uniquely American problem. Skin bleaching creams and lotions are billion-dollar industries on an international level. So many countries in Asia, Africa, South America, pretty much anywhere you go, we are slaves to white supremacy and European beauty standards, lusting over fair skin just as much as we are here. In a lot of these countries, it seems that people are just much more candid about it. I suppose it's not necessarily seen as taboo. It's just a fact of life that light skin is seen as more beautiful, more desirable, all sorts of positive qualities that are not assigned to or associated with having darker skin. I've even heard of people in other countries having to lighten their skin just to be able to get hired for jobs. I think these dynamics and attitudes are just as prevalent in the United States, but they're definitely more covert. And for that reason, I wasn't really aware of these issues and how pervasive they are probably until I was kind of grown. You know, I had my experiences within my family, but I've gone to predominantly white schools most of my life, public ones until college anyway, and they all definitely had a mix of races, but they were mostly white nonetheless. So I was very often a token who would hang with the other tokens. To this day, whenever my friends and I take group photos, the running joke is that we look like a Benetint ad. It legit looks like we were cast for a college brochure to demonstrate the school's diversity on campus. So a lot of my education on the issues of colorism and this pitting of light skin against dark skin, those are things I started to learn about later. I remember ages ago, this had to be like 8 or 9 years ago, there was something going around on social media where it was literally hashtagging like hashtag team light skin or hashtag team dark skin. I assume this had been going down on Twitter mostly because to this day I've never been on Twitter, I've never had it, but I also know this whole thing preceded Instagram. So for the hashtags to be a thing, it would have had to be Twitter. Anyway, I remember that going on, and I even feel like it was started or at least popularized by a hair care brand, which is the only reason it would have entered my consciousness. That was really the only reason it would have ever come to my attention. And it was early on in me discovering YouTube and hair videos. And it was some brand behind the whole light skin versus dark skin thing, like Mixed Chicks or somebody like that. I'm not sure if it was them, but that name Mixed Chicks has always irked me for real, but that's a complete non sequitur. All right, here we go. I'm actually about to try out this foundation. I'm going to use a pretty small amount because from what I understand, it's pretty full coverage, and I'm not a full coverage type of bitch anyway. Just going to take that much, about a pea-sized amount. Anyway, I remember being kind of appalled at just how saddening the whole dark skin versus light skin thing was. Just creating more unnecessary division, and worse still, reinforcing this hierarchy, this idea that one is somehow better than the other. I think I did a pretty good job matching my color here, by the way, guys. Pretty chuffed. I do have to be careful because I just had my face tattoos, my eyebrow microblading touched up, and I can't get any makeup in them, so I also don't really want to get any makeup too close to them. So I'm probably going to just avoid my forehead for the most part, which is a lot easier to get away with when you have bangs. I've seen a lot of videos popping up on my YouTube suggestions feed about colorism in the past several months. Some of them I watch, some of them I don't. Some of these content creators are, to put it lightly, not helping. The rumors are true, guys, by the way. This is pretty full coverage. I didn't use much, as you saw, but I feel like it really has evened out my skin tone pretty well. The finish looks satin. I wouldn't call it a true matte. I would call it satin. Then again, I did put my illuminating base on underneath, just using it the way I would normally wear any foundation. Anyway, it's one thing to create discourse around these issues of colorism, which is critical, but doing so while furthering the divides in our own community, however, is not helpful. Perpetuating the narrative that it's dark-skinned women against light-skinned women competing for men and status and whatever else, definitely not helpful in so many ways. Digging our heels into our own trauma is not the way out of it. Nonetheless, I have learned a lot about the mistreatment, marginalization, and negative stereotypes faced by Black women with dark skin that I don't necessarily face. A lot of you guys know Ivy, OG YouTuber. I've watched her forever. She's done videos where she's touched on some of the comments that she gets under her videos. Things like, "You're pretty for a dark-skinned girl," or, "Oh, Ivy, you're not that dark." Insanity. Frankly, I was completely ignorant to these kinds of things for the entirety of my youth because I simply never knew the full extent to which people actually thought these things, let alone said them out loud. Telling someone you aren't that dark somehow equates a compliment. Of course, it all just goes back to this same issue of proximity to whiteness being perceived as better time and time and time and time and time again. As a Black person in America, I face plenty of persecution. I'm fully stocked. However, my complexion still affords me privileges that aren't necessarily afforded to someone who has skin that's darker than mine. And I don't even have pretty eyes. If you know what I'm referring to with that, comment a baby emoji. But I'm sure as shit not going to say where that's from because I don't want to give any publicity to that kind of fuckery. I'm still reckoning with my privilege as I look back on my life, my career, everything. And of course, in situations that I face now, being much more aware of these dynamics as an adult compared to when I was a kid and a teenager. The fact is, as long as whiteness reigns supreme, the lighter your skin is, the more privileges you are likely to have. These systems of prejudice aren't going to go away by us ignoring them. They can only begin to be dismantled when we are honest and when we acknowledge and expose them. It's exemplified in the notion of the light-skinned woman, often biracial or just white, and always with hair that can take water, as they used to say, of this woman being somehow more palatable and more disturbingly seen as a prize for the unambiguously Black man, an accessory of sorts, which helps cement his status. We see this happen over and over in our own families to start, but also in pop culture, both on and off the screen since forever. BRB, Lash time. And a bitch eyes ain't bold no mo. As I was saying, coming to America, the Huxtables. The Fresh Prince famously recasting Aunt Viv to be light-skinned. And fret not, we've got plenty of current or at least recent examples too. The Carmichael Show, Atlanta, Blackish, which I have, to be honest with you, never even watched because of no. By the way, if you're wondering what the hell I'm doing, I don't wear mascara on my top lashes if I'm wearing a strip lash. I'm just painting my lashes black again since they have some of that cream shadow on them. And take your pick with these rappers, from Kodak Black to Wayne. There's no shortage of these men who are openly obsessed with red bones. And do I even need to say it? Kanye. He even said himself, when you get on, he'll leave your ass for a white girl. Self-fulfilling prophecy right there. I honestly feel that Instagram is, in many ways, exacerbating this issue of the new beauty standard being racially ambiguous, Black without being Black kind of aesthetic, but I'll save that talk for another day. My point is, this "where the white women at" attitude is ubiquitous. Or where's the closest thing to a white woman without actually being a white woman? Where men prioritize going after Latina or biracial, mixed race women. And don't get me wrong, you like who you like, you love who you love, whatever the case may be. And while I do prefer to date Black men myself because of shared experiences. Real talk, I simply don't care to have to explain why I'm putting a silk scarf on my head at night. Nonetheless, that is just my preference. I date whomever. If I'm into you, I'm into you. So I'm not anti-interracial dating by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, that's just great. Big old glob of mascara right on my face. Anyway, the image of the light-skinned woman on the arm of these black men on red carpets and whatnot is nearly what we have seen for years and what we still see nowadays. Women of deeper complexion have always been the exception, and they remain the exception, not the rule. Now, the conversation around this very noticeable dynamic and colorism in general is happening on a scale much larger than I think it ever was in the past, because of social media giving more people platforms, and even because of having this vocabulary. The words colorist, colorism, inclusivity. It allows for commentary that perhaps would have only happened at kitchen tables in the past. And it allows for voices that would have otherwise been silenced or ignored to finally be heard, to a point at least. Sometime soon, I do also want to talk to you guys about inclusivity, which is not to be confused with inclusivity marketing, not the same thing. So I do want to have a proper discussion on that with you guys soon. But the point is, I do feel that this outrage slash faux outrage that we've seen from a lot of booty gurus in the past couple of years over foundation shades has helped to bring issues of colorism and inclusivity to the attention of a lot of people who would have otherwise happily continued ignoring them, or who legitimately maybe were not aware in some cases. Juvia's Place, a black-owned business, came out with this foundation in 40 some odd shades, I think, and I've said several times before that Fenty gets somewhat undue credit for being the first brand to cater to deeper skin tones with their complexion products, and I say undue credit only because there are brands who did do that before them. However, Fenty is the first social media brand, the first millennial brand to have done it, and to have done so from the jump and on such a large scale. And I've said before that I do think too much emphasis has been placed on that number, that 40 shades, because I personally feel that any brand's number of shades for complexion products comes down to their business model. So if it's 4 shades or 40 shades, I just ask that they make the spectrum within that range, however many shades it is, vast. As far as the brands who aren't here for us, I say fuck them, just vote with them dollars, baby. Anyway, I think people were, and perhaps still are, hung up on that number of shades, 40 shades, and it's created a bit of an arms race for other brands to match or beat that number. And in many cases, it's clearly pandering, as are many of the people who are trying to take a stand against colorism. It's often pandering. As a black-owned business, I would hope that Juvia's Place is coming from a place of sincerity with their shade range. I do think that they might be trying to right the ship somewhat in their relationships with black influencers, or lack thereof. Coincidentally, my fave, as told by Kenya, I know a lot of you guys discovered her channel around the same time that I did, or even a lot of you guys found her channel based off of my recommendation recently. She actually just put up a video today about Juvia's Place, and I haven't watched it yet, but it's called The Problem with Juvia's Place or something to that effect. YouTube is so funny to me because it really immediately, on a regular basis, reflects the theory of a collective consciousness. I mean, I obviously had no idea that Kenya was going to be doing that video, let alone on the same day that I'd be doing a video somewhat about Juvia's Place. Just when I think I'm done blending, I see something else that I have to blend a little bit more. Anyway, hopefully I'll have time to watch Kenya's video either later today or tomorrow. I have a hunch that she's going to speak to some of the same issues that I've had with Juvia's Place. Without getting too much into it, I did feel some type of way about how the brand handled their come up, building their name on the backs of black influencers, and then kind of saying, girl, bye, once they felt those black influencers were no longer needed, once they had the endorsement of white influencers, which, despite being a black-owned brand, reflects white supremacy at work. I'm just looking over my face, and I think I want to build up a little bit more coverage down here where I have my hyperpigmentation. I did watch a decent number of reviews on this foundation before I bought it, and I saw that they had sent PR, Juvia's Place had sent PR to quite a few black influencers, which I felt was correct. So while I remain skeptical about the brand, I do think that's a step in the right direction. That worked really well. Just patting it out on the area I needed with a finger kind of works like a concealer because the coverage is so high. Anyway, I think that is a step in the right direction, especially because those reviews from black influencers are what pushed me over the edge to actually support the brand and buy this foundation in the first place. I need a new foundation like I need a hole in the head. But when I saw all of these influencers of color who were finding shades that actually match them, often having 2 or 3 options, there was just something about seeing how happy they all were about that it warmed the cage of ice that surrounds my heart. As people of color, I think a lot of us are so used to having maybe one shade that we can use, often having to make that one shade work in some way or another by kind of adjusting with concealer or bronzer or whatever. Or just as often, we are ignored completely and there are no shades for us at all on some serious Ralph Ellison type of shit. I know it's just makeup, but there was something special about seeing all of these influencers who were just so happy to feel seen, to feel included, and to have shades, not just a shade, but actual options that were made for us. Like I said, it's just foundation, so it's not really important, but it is important. Okay, I think everything's looking blended well enough. I think it's time for some finishing powder. I personally waited until I could swatch the foundations at Ulta. One, because Juvia's return policy, I believe, is non-existent from what I've heard. So I wanted to be able to return. And I also wanted to be able to swatch. And I found it was kind of an embarrassment of riches where I actually had the hardest time I've ever had picking a shade because it wasn't a question of there being between 0 and 1 shades that will work for me. For once, a hoe had options. Juvia's also starts the shade numbers going from the deepest to the lightest. So I think the deepest shades are in the 100s, and then as you get lighter, the numbers go up. It's the opposite of what is done typically. And I'm 99.999998% sure I've heard of another brand doing the same thing one other time, but I can't for the life of me remember what brand that was. Anyway, it was really interesting and confusing for me when I was trying to find my shade because I'm sure I can't be the only one who's just so used to automatically looking toward the bottom of the shade chart to the lower shelf of the display all the way on the far right to find my right shade. I kept having to remind myself that things went the opposite way when I was there at the store trying to find my shade. You know, if I was trying to go lighter or darker, I had to go the opposite way of what we usually have to do. For once, the darkest skins are on the top. And the degree to which that threw me off just shopping, just being at the store shopping, was truly illuminating. As people of color, we're just so used to being on the bottom and literally getting more and more close to the bottom the darker you are. Being at the bottom of the totem pole is so cleaved to our sense of self. It's like I was saying earlier about this being Stockholm Syndrome to the max. We are at a point where we don't even need the external influence of our oppressors to keep our own oppression going. It's like we told white people, we'll take it from here. Time for lips. I'm going to keep it simple and just do a nude. This does not have anything growing out of it if you're into that sort of thing, so this might not be for you. Switching up the order of foundation shades is by no means going to be the end of colorism, and it might even be a touch gimmicky, but I do think it's a surprisingly effective way to at least start to challenge these norms that truly need to be rejected once and for all. There is a staggering amount of deprogramming that lies ahead that needs to be done, and I don't expect to get there in my lifetime, which I know sounds pessimistic, but hopefully bit by bit more of us will start to realize that we are marginalized enough already, so we don't need to other each other on top of that. Last but not least, a little bit of lip gloss, Max Clear, best in the game if you ask me. And there you have it. Here come the awkward slow-mo posy shots so that we can call this a real YouTube video. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts, at least, on colorism, the challenges that we face ahead as a people, as a society, as human beings. I look forward to reading all of your comments and keeping this discussion going. And if you were curious about anything that I use on my face, because I think the only thing I talked about explicitly was the actual foundation, everything's linked in the description box. That concludes this tea talk. Thank you again for hanging out with me while I did another Get Ranty With Me type of video. Beyond that, that's it. So I will see you guys in the next video, and remember, never trust anyone with a Morphe code. Bye bye.
That's a nappy headed hose there, I'm gonna tell you that now.